Hey guys, how's it going? Um, I just wanted to explain what your next activity would be and what it's going to involve. We're going to be covering something new. It's called the invasive species, and you may have heard of these before. They're actually pretty common, but I just wanted to go over kind of why we're doing it. I know that standards and skills are things that we focused on in the past, so I wanted to make sure that you're just aware of what the standards and skills are that you're going to be doing for this activity. I think that this kind of online learning lends itself well to this because now I can make you suffer through it. So the standards are to ultimately just look at how human activity can impact the environment and this word that you may have heard before, biodiversity. So today we're going to be looking at the problem of invasive species, and we're going to focus on the skills of constructing explanations and designing a solution, and also looking at the cause and effect of these species on their environment. Ultimately, by the end, I'd like you to be able to explain the difference between introduced and invasive species, identify how invasives impact biodiversity, and ultimately, you're going to try to design a solution to curb the effect of an invasive species that will be of your choosing. So, a few things that I want to review before you get into this activity. First, a word that you did hear before, which is niche. Now, remember we were talking about the chipmunks and the squirrels and how where they live and what they eat and what eats them. All of that stuff plays into this niche, which is their very unique role that they have in their environment. And it's not just limited to that. It's not just diet and where they live. It's also their behaviors when they sleep, if they're nocturnal or diurnal. It's all of those elements combined that go into this niche. Now, in an environment, you've got a lot of different niches because it could be specific to which part of the tree the bird is living in and where they're going to migrate to. So you get a lot of different niches, and that helps to create biodiversity. Biodiversity would be all of these different organisms that coexist in this environment, all with these different niches, different characteristics, different traits. They all have their own unique roles, and that makes up the biodiversity. Think like regular diversity, but now we're talking in an ecological sense. And the last thing is the competitive exclusion principle. And that is that no two organisms can occupy the same niche in the same place at the same time. Remember, even if they're eating the same thing, they can't live in the same place, eat the same thing at the same time. Otherwise, one's going to leave or it's going to lose. And when it loses in ecology, it's going to die. So when we see two species, either interspecific or even two members of the same species, intraspecific, vying for the same resources in the same area, we see that this principle comes into play. The stronger one's going to survive, or the weaker one's going to leave. Um, but ultimately, we see that when two organisms occupy the same niche, there's going to be a conflict that results in one of them leaving or dying. So, what does this have to do with invasives? Well, you have to understand that humans, pretty much since we've moved, have been taking animals and plants and everything with us wherever we go. Now, sometimes we could take an organism from one place and bring it to another place, and it does fine, and it really doesn't disrupt the environment. These are what we call introduced species. Introduced species are organisms that are brought from one place to another by humans. It's not like, they just migrate there. Humans have brought them either purposefully or accidentally, but when they get to their new environment, they do not cause a negative impact on their surroundings. So when they go to their new environment, they find a niche that may not be filled by other organisms, so there's no competition, intraspecific, or they have an interaction within their environment that doesn't disrupt the flow of what was already there. So these are introduced species. Humans bring them from one place to another, and they find a role that's not going to then force another organism out. They kind of just become part of the environment or the ecosystem and the food chain and the food web, and they have a unique niche. Now, an example of this is coyotes in Florida. Now, coyotes now live in every state in the United States except for Hawaii, but they didn't all start there. But coyotes were introduced to Florida, and they were able to kind of feed off of organisms that other organisms did, but they found a way to do it that wasn't going to encroach on other organisms, so they were introduced. Now, an invasive species is similar in that this is an organism that humans have brought from one environment to another. The problem is these do cause a lot of negative impact on their environment that they're introduced to. Um, an example of this is the Burmese python in Florida, as you could see pictured here. Now, Burmese pythons originally are from Asia, and they make really good pets, at least at first. The problem with the Burmese python is that it grows incredibly fast. And for anyone that's 13 or 14 or however old you want to be when you get a snake, when they get a snake, they get them and they're maybe 2 feet long. But, it gets bigger, they get a bigger cage, it continues to grow, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and before you know it, your Burmese python that you bought 10 years ago is now going to be 12 feet long. Now, when you have a 12-foot long snake, you don't really know what to do with it, but you probably don't want it anymore. And people in Florida, in droves, were taking these snakes and they were letting them outside. Now, of course, this wasn't just in Florida. I'm sure in Connecticut it happened too. The problem is a Burmese python in Connecticut, it's not going to be able to hack it out in its environment. A Burmese python in Florida, however, was able to survive in its environment. It was able to feed off of the land. It was able to go into these environments, specifically like the Everglades, and find rabbits and raccoons, even small alligators, and birds, and uh, tons of organisms to feed off of, and it just kept growing. Now, the problem with the Burmese python is that nothing in that area was really hunting it, so it had free reign to eat whatever it wanted, to reproduce at will, and nothing really stopped it. Now, these Burmese pythons ended up growing to be 18 feet long. I think the longest recorded was over 20 feet that was found in Florida, and it really just took over. Now, this has had a ton of damage on Florida's ecology, specifically in the Everglades, where they already had a lot of biodiversity, so much so that it was a tourist attraction. It has since caused a lot of these organisms to die off and a lot of these species to go near extinct to the point of endangerment or actually extinct rather. So, what does Florida do to remove these pythons? Well, that becomes a problem. If you look here on the left, this is a food pyramid of a Burmese python and what it would eat in its first 5 years. If you look, it's one raccoon, one opossum, 4 5-foot alligators, 5 American coots, which is a bird, herons, another bird, squirrels, rabbits, wrens, rats, and mice. Now, this is one snake at 5 years old. And what Florida decided is that they needed to just get citizens out there with guns hunting these pythons. And they actually made a python eradication coalition where they would pay people to go out with a rifle, kill these pythons, put them in a bag, take them to the government, and get paid for it. Now, if you look here on the right, it actually has a diagram of what they would pay. First 4 feet, you'd get $50 per snake. At 8 feet, you'd get $150. So obviously, they get a lot larger than this, but you're looking at $150 to kill an 8-foot snake. Now, if this is your full-time job, you could go out. It's estimated that there's anywhere between 30 and 300,000 Burmese pythons in southern Florida, Everglade area right now. It's not exactly difficult to find these. People use drones to hunt them out. People have used helicopters, thermal goggles, whatever you can to try to find these snakes in their environments. If you look here, this was as of 2018, so it's a little dated, but you could see the number of pythons that were hunted down by citizens and this eradication coalition. Quite a few at 0 to 4 feet. These are the young ones. However, if you look, you still got a lot of 8-footers, 9-footers, quite a few 11 to 12 feet. some even over 17 feet at a total of 4. And these organisms just keep growing and growing and growing. Now, has their plan been successful? Not really. It hasn't been enough, but at least it was a place to start. It's raised a lot of public awareness. They've done measures to try to prevent people from bringing in Burmese pythons as pets to the state. You no longer can have them. Last I knew, you couldn't have a Burmese python as a pet because it becomes so problematic in the state of Florida. And sure, there's a lot more that they could do, but it becomes a very difficult problem to deal with. How do you get rid of all of these snakes that are hugely successful in your environment? And there's no one right answer to this question. So, for your activity, what you're going to be doing is reading the invasive species assignment and looking at another case of it. This is the case of field mice. Now, you've all seen mice before. You probably didn't know that they don't belong here in the United States. Mice are invasive, or maybe more so introduced, but they still do cause a problem. But they're an invasive species that we have in the United States. You're going to research 3 species, not including the mouse, and there's going to be a ton of articles provided. Should you choose to use an article that's not provided, that's fine. Please make sure it's credible. But look for invasive species that impact the United States, or some really cool fringe cases. You'll see that there's cases of a mongoose. There's the Puerto Rican tree frog called the coqui. There's Japanese shore crab, the lionfish. There's a ton of different cool organisms that there are articles available for. You're going to read about at least 3 of them. Then you're going to create a community-based action plan to prevent the spread or eradication of your species conveyed through a poster. Now, this part's going to be tricky. You're afforded the opportunity to do this fully digitally because we're all working from our computers. And if you want, you could use whatever resources you have online to make a poster online. It doesn't need to be printed out. If you want to draw it, old-fashioned pen and paper, that's fine too. You could draw it out and take a picture and send it to me. Now, due dates are going to be discussed as this gets assigned, but it's going to take you a little while. What you want to do is create a poster that raises awareness to the fact of what the species is, how it got here, what its damage is, and come up with a plan to try to get rid of it. Like I said, in Florida, they're struggling, and it's not great, and they haven't found the solution. But come up with a plan that's at least a start to get rid of your organism. In Florida, they're paying people to hunt them. They're preventing people from bringing them into the state. Those are measures that they're taking to prevent this invasive from spreading in the environment. What you're going to do is create a poster that just tries to do that. Now, I'm going to post a few examples of posters that are similar to this that you could use kind of as inspiration. Obviously, we're not going to copy what they say, but use them as inspiration to try to get an idea for what you want to do. Of course, if you have any questions, please send me an email. Good luck and have fun. Stay healthy.